You have probably heard or seen of the NFL films The Brady Six. But hey, you came here because you're a smart guy with an above average attention span, and you prefer American baseball over American football. But hey, you just wish you had a baseball equivalent? Well, I give you the superior baseball equivalent. Step aside the Brady Six, get out of here! Make way for the Brady 43. Tom Brady was famously selected in the 18th round of the 1995 MLB Draft by the Montreal Expos. All of this was, of course,
a conspiracy led by Major League Baseball and its content creators to draw NFL fans to the steroid era of baseball.
For predominantly legal reasons. This is a joke, guys.
It's the 90s.
Welcome back to 1994. Guess what? Everyone still doesn't like the Yankees. But you may have been too distracted playing your new PlayStation with ultra-realistic graphics, or watching Kevin Costner's Field of Dreams on repeat. Man, wouldn't it be cool if they played an actual MLB game there one day? But guess what? The 1994 MLB season was amazing for people who despise baseball with every ounce of their body. The rising tension between players and owners and MLB strike abruptly caused the end of the 1994 season. Despite the halt, the league is currently witnessing the rise of future Hall of Fame catcher Mike Piazza, and they're thinking, hey, we can do that, right? The Expos currently employ Darren Fletcher behind the plate, who is having an all-star breakout season. I don't know how he was an all-star either. The 90s era of baseball was just really weird, but it evens out because it was cool with his logos. Fletcher is currently a National League All-Star reserve with a 92 OPS+, meaning he's 8% worse than the league average hitter. While catchers tend to be more defensively oriented, he's not exactly blowing the world away with his defense either. He currently throws base runners out at a 23% caught stealing rate, which is 9% below the league average in 94. He also has a -2 total zone fielding runs above average, meaning he has cost his team 2 runs defensively. Just for the sake of comparison, the American League counterpart is Mickey Tettleton. Tettleton leads Fletcher in every category other than runs batted in and batting average. The main reason I believe Fletcher made it into the All-Star game was more of a result of the Expos pitching staff than him. The Expos pitching staff in 94 had a league-high 8 shutouts and a league lowest ERA. And with the offensive dominance of Mike Piazza and the lack of Fletcher's, I'd imagine it'd be worth taking a shot on the greatest player to ever play. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's see who are the 43 catchers drafted ahead of Thomas Edward Patrick Brady Jr. Starting with number 1. Ben Davis is the first victim of the Brady 43. Drafted second overall by the San Diego Padres, he's the only catcher drafted in the first round at all. Ben Davis would go on to play 3 full seasons for the Padres. He never really stood out offensively, posting a career 80 OPS+, and never lived up to expectations as a result. He's generally labeled as one of the bigger draft busts in Padres history, and it looks worse when you compare to the guys drafted ahead of him, such as Roy Halladay and Todd Helton. In the minors, his best year was his time at A-ball, but with major red flags. It was there he had his most home runs, being 23, but his peak OPS was .773, and in California League ball, which is famous for its hitters-friendly environment. In 900 plate appearances, he had a 21% strikeout rate, with an only 5% walk rate, which is especially concerning due to the lower levels of the minors typically featuring higher on-base percentages due to the lack of consistent quality pitching. Ben Davis would stay in baseball after, however, and since then has become a commentator for the Philadelphia Phillies. Ben Pietrek is a unique case due to his promising career in the minor leagues. Every year he drastically improved his home run rate while lowering his strikeout rate. Every year his on-base and slugging percentage would continue to rise throughout AAA and AA. His only drastic flaw that he was a below-average catcher defensively, and his caught stealing rate as a base runner was at 49%. So, what went wrong in his career? Well, nothing that Pietrek could control. He slowly developed Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease is where you slowly lose control of your body's functions, and for Pietrek that started while he was playing baseball in the minors. What's even crazier about it is that he continued to play through his condition and hardly told any teammates or coaches about it. This eventually cut his career short to just his age 27 season. If you're interested in learning more about his struggles and experiences, he has a book called 40,000 to 1. And over the past few seasons, he has had his number retired since by his high school and the Hillsborough Hops organization. I don't know if it's just me or not, but doesn't every guy named Craig feel like a Blue Jays fan? Anyways, Craig Wilson never ended up playing for the Blue Jays. He was drafted by them, but traded to the Pirates shortly after in a two-team, 10-player trade. In 6 years, he had 99 home runs and 113 OPS+. What stands out to me most about his career, however, is his ability to get hit by a pitch. He led the league in 2002 and 2004 with 21 and 30 respectively, and this wasn't just a one-off thing for him. Even in the minor leagues, he continually got hit by pitches. Over the course of 14 seasons across the minors and the majors, he would go on to get hit 193 times. Talk about a painfully great career. Chip Alley regressed every year in OPS and batting average throughout his time in the minors, and ultimately never made it past AA ball. Next up, we have AJ Hinch, who ultimately did not sign in this draft class, but would go on to be the poster boy definition of what a zero-WAR catcher looks like. Rumor has it he holds a replacement level player meeting every Tuesday after the Detroit Tigers' loss. AJ Hinch isn't exactly famous for anything he did as a player, but rather as a manager and his role in the Houston Astros cheating scandal. He is currently the manager of the Detroit Tigers. The truth is with Kevin Bauers is that he never really got his start. He played 36 games with the Mets rookie ball team. The following 2 years were riddled with injuries. While Kevin Bauers' first 36 games with the Mets rookie ball team weren't exactly inspiring or remarkable, but it's hard to gauge his entire career based off this due to the MLB Draft being in the middle of the season where you're abruptly called up to some no-name town to play. But he's still involved in the game of baseball and is currently the coach at Indiana State University. Jeff Alfano was similar to Chip Alley in the fact that he just regressed every year by OPS, on-base percentage, slugging, ultimately never playing above AA ball. Next up is Danny Ardoin. By this point, the on-base percentage movement was in full force for the Athletics. In the Moneyball book by Michael Lewis, it's rumored that for an Oakland Athletic to make it to the major league level, he would have to have at least a 400 on-base percentage. Ardoin came relatively close to that with a 385 on-base percentage in 2000 at AAA, but was traded shortly after where he would go on to have an impressively odd career. Across 5 years, he played 165 games at the major league level, each for a different team. With a career OPS of 53, he still accrued half a WAR, which is impressive. He made his MLB debut at age 25, but did not find himself playing there again until his age 29 season. He would play in the minor leagues up until 2009, with his last stint being in the LA Dodgers system. Overall, he played 15 seasons in the minors, accruing over 3,000 at-bats. He would play for 23 teams across his times in the minors and the majors. And while people would be quick to forget a player like this, for me this is someone I'm intrigued by. It's hard to stay in baseball, and even harder with career numbers like this. But these guys are the lifeblood of baseball. We need these players just as much as we need superstar players like Bryce Harper. Post-baseball career, Ardoin has had a pretty successful career in business, and his son is currently in the Orioles minor league system as a catcher as well. Next up, we have an early 1900s sounding name in Pee Wee Lopez. He struggled to find any stability in his career because he played for 4 different MLB franchises in 7 seasons in the minors, reaching up to AAA at one point with the Atlanta Braves. Lopez particularly struggled on the offensive side of the plate, struggling to hover around a 700 OPS. Defensively was where Lopez shined. His caught stealing rate in particular stood out. His career average in the minors was 40%, but toward the later end of his career, he was averaging nearly a 50% caught stealing rate. Overall, he was just on the cusp of making it to the big leagues, but ultimately never got his shot. Steve Lemazny was a Massachusetts kid who was drafted by his hometown team, the Boston Red Sox. He's also the closest thing we have to a Moonlight Graham architect in this draft. I say this because he only had 2 career at-bats that both ended in strikeouts at the major league level. He would go on to spend over a decade in the Red Sox minor league system. Making his rookie ball debut at age 17, he would spend 5 seasons across rookie ball and the single-A level. His breakout years were in 1998 and 1999, where he had back-to-back 20 home run seasons. Lemazny would ride this momentum all the way up to his major league debut. He would only spend 1 game at the major league level before being sent back down to AAA, where his career went south. He was hit by a pitch in a game, which ultimately went straight into his eyes, resulting in permanent damage. This forced his early retirement. I would also say like Moonlight Graham, however, because of his work in the community. He is currently heralded as a local legend and currently stays in the game by coaching a softball team in New England. Mike Rose is the first of 13 catchers that the Houston Astros would go on to draft in '94. He would go on to play 27 MLB games with a 42 OPS+. However, he was voted as the best defensive catcher during his time in the Astros minor league system. While he did spend a majority of his career in the minor leagues, he did end up winning a championship with the 2006 Cardinals. Mike Rose was similar to Danny Ardorn in the fact that he just played everywhere he could. Across his career in the minor leagues, major leagues, and independent ball, he would go on to play for 22 teams. As a result, he would go on to play up until 2010. The biggest flaw in Mike Rose's game was inconsistency. His best years tended to be when his on-base percentage was higher, and at one point he had a 407 on base with a 1-to-1 walk-to-strikeout ratio. Ironically, his best year in on-base percentage was with the Athletics in 2004. You ultimately just couldn't predict what kind of season Mike Rose was going to have on a yearly basis. He could easily have more walks to strikeouts one season, and then follow it up with double the amount of strikeouts to walks. Ultimately, inconsistency is what I believe to be his greatest flaw. What's most impressive about Mike Rose's career is the longevity of it. Drafted in '94, he played up until 2010. He would go on to accumulate 3,590 at-bats from his time in the minors and the majors. The bulk of Jason LaRue's career came from his time with the Cincinnati Reds. Throughout the course of his career, 84 of his 96 home runs came from his time with the Reds. His major flaw, however, was relating to his strikeout rate. He struck out at a 29% clip, which is about 9% above league average, and for his career he had an 84 OPS+. Jason LaRue, however, was particularly effective on the defensive end. In relation to throwing base runners out, he was dominant in this area of the game. Every year he had at least an above average caught stealing rate. In particular, 2001 was his best year with a 61 league leading caught stealing rate. His baseball career ended in an unorthodox manner. He was in the famous brawl between the Reds and Cardinals in 2010. During the brawl, he would end up on the ground where he would end up being stomped repeatedly by Johnny Cueto with cleats. This resulted in concussions with long-lasting side effects. This caused him to retire in order to spend more time with his family and work in his farm in a small town in Texas. He would go on to accredit his lengthy career to his relationship with Tony La Russa. Brian Snyder is the first catcher taken by the Montreal Expos not named Tom Brady. Working his way up through the Expos minor league system, he would eventually become the full-time replacement for Darren Fletcher. Snyder and Fletcher had very different careers in how they utilized their strengths. If you compare their careers solely based off wins above replacement, Fletcher wins with a 7.6 WAR, while Snyder only has a 6.8 WAR. However, I believe Snyder was just as sufficient as a full-time starting catcher. It truthfully just comes down to whether you prefer offense or defense from my perspective. For the offensive side of the plate, Fletcher was definitively the better catcher, having around a 90 OPS for his career. Meanwhile, Snyder will average about an 80 OPS plus for his career. Over the course of a full season, Fletcher will typically hit double the amount of home runs Snyder will, so the main trade-off here is offense for defense. Defensively, Fletcher is simply just below average. However, Snyder ranks in the top 230 players for total zone fielding runs above average. Overall, I believe there's an argument to be made for both catchers to be your starter over each other. It largely depends on whether you need more offense or defense at your current team's position. Nowadays, Snyder is currently the AAA manager for the Syracuse Mets. The first catcher taken of the 6th round was Carl Thompson. He never made it to the major league level and kind of had a bit of a static career, never having a breakout year, but not necessarily regressing either. He had a career OPS of 742 and only had 4 seasons in a minor league backup role. As we exit the initial rounds of the MLB Draft, players along Thompson's career trajectory will become more of a common theme. Ultimately, guys drafted in the later rounds will just not receive as many chances as top 5 round draft picks. Alongside that, information on these players becomes very hard to find, so we'll kind of speed run through the next couple of guys here. At number 15, we have Jeremiah Lignitz. When drafting kids out of high school, they typically have a boom or bust effect, and for Lignitz, he crashed hard. He played 4 seasons in the Tiger system, never making it past A-ball. He had a strikeout rate of 34%. He struggled to get on base, barely having an above 300 on base rate. He also lacked the ability of home run power, only having 4 home runs from his age 18 to 21 season. As it is with later round picks in the MLB Draft, this is commonplace. You just kind of throw something at the wall and see if it sticks, and if it does, great. If it doesn't, move on. Shane Gunderson was drafted out of the University of Minnesota. He held his ground at the rookie ball and single A level, but as he got to double A, you could kind of see a drop off. While never posting amazing career numbers, he did average around a 750 OPS, which isn't bad, but age was definitely a factor working against him, and when he retired, he was about 2 years older than the average AA player. At 17, we have the first Canadian-born player on this list at Blaine Fortin. As someone who has had relations to current Canadian baseball players, I always found their different experiences from traditional American or even Latin baseball pathways interesting. There's already a bias against colder northern states in America, as is the case of Mike Trout and New Jersey, and I imagine the Canadian climate amplifies this bias. As for Fortin's playing career, he had an OPS under 700 for his career in minor league baseball. However, he did play for a brief period of time indie ball in Canada, and briefly played two-way baseball in 1999 for a Winnipeg independent ball team. And as of 2020, he has been introduced into the Manitoba Baseball Hall of Fame. Next up is Scott Chapman, and wow, would you look at that, it's the Astros again on the list. The second of 13 catchers drafted in this draft class, and just 28 picks later. At this point, I might as well segue this from the Brady 43 to the Astros 13. Scott Chapman just struggled in the lower levels of the minors, spending 6 years between rookie ball and single A. The highest he ever got was playing 3 games at double A before being cut. He struggled to stay above a 700 OPS for his career, and overall just didn't have much upside on the offensive side of the plate. You know what? You deserve a little bit of a break. This video has probably gone on a lot longer than I expected to. We're almost midway through this marathon of a video, so grab a water, maybe you're a tea guy, a coffee guy, because we have an interview at number 19. Just really quickly so you'll have an understanding of who Andy Burress is. He was drafted by the Reds, never made it to the major league level, and he was kind of one of the final rush of catchers selected in rounds 5 and 6. Just between these 2 rounds, 12 catchers were drafted. And he's also a unique case in the sense that he was drafted at age 17 out of high school, and typically coming out of high school, guys are age 18 to 19, so he's even younger than the typical minor league player. He played 7 seasons in the Cincinnati Reds minor league system between rookie ball all the way up to AA, and his final stop was in Chattanooga in 2001. Now that we have some basic information out of the way, let's go on and get to the interview. Enjoy. Just a quick introduction. I've always had a particular interest in the life of minor leaguers, whether that was from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and nowadays. One of the projects I was working on was on the 95 draft, just because I found it interesting, because obviously you got like the big names like Tom Brady, and you also had the first major draft after the lockout. First major question I had was like, what was your experience being drafted? Was there like any uncertainty after the 94 lockout? Because I know on Baseball Reference it said you were like around 17 or so when you were drafted. Was that like, I still want to go for sure? Or was there like a little bit of doubt, like, should I go to college?
Well, I kind of got a funny, tell this a lot, and people sometimes have a hard time, I think, believing it. But I'd never been on an airplane. I never traveled out of the state of Georgia. I had signed to play football. That was my thing. I had a good senior year and said, hey, this baseball thing may be a lot more beneficial than the football. I mean, I got drafted and left 3 days later for a state that I didn't even know existed. You think about being on these airplanes, 777 with 5 seats in the middle and 3 on each side, and I feel like the walls were caving in on me. The least thing I was worried about was baseball. Here I am leaving, going to a place I don't even know exists, and have no idea where I'm going to live, and don't know how I'm going to do anything. Like I said, my mom, Southern Town, she threw my dirty clothes in the basket, and I just thought they magically appeared back in my drawer. I didn't know how to wash clothes. For me, it was, the baseball part of it was like, heck, man, I get to go do something and actually get paid to do it. And
So is that the major culture shock then? Going from, I'm sure like you're the best in your high school team to like a minor league clubhouse?
It helped me grow up a lot. I've had a lot of success after baseball because of what I had to go through during the baseball. Learning to live with different cultures and learning that everybody didn't think like I did. Growing up in a southern town, you go sit in the same church and you see the same people, and you think everybody acts somewhat similar to the people you grew up around, and you get out there and you see there's other religions, there's other nationalities, and so for me that was probably the biggest thing for me is evolve as a person. That baseball kind of taught that to you.
With how crowded in particular MLB drafts were, like pre-20, even 2000s really, did you feel like you had adequate coaching and guidance and like even basic nutrition because of how many rounds and drafts and players were coming in? Because nowadays baseball is like 4 or 5 levels, but back then you had A ball, A- ball, A+ ball, rookie ball B, things like that.
For the most part, and I think even still today, I'm obviously still in the game and still talk to a lot of those guys. I think there's still a lot of the same problems Heck, I grew up on peanut butter sandwiches anyway. We had peanut butter in the locker rooms. I thought I was, you know, I wasn't privy to a lot of the things that a lot of these college guys had coming in. And my first 5 years of life was in a single wide trailer. I had clean clothes and a peanut butter sandwich, so I felt like I was. Obviously, things are changed today with all the technology and got a lot of good information. Again, being with the Reds, you had a lot of those guys coming back, Boone and Bench and George Foster. I mean, we had a lot of those guys who were. I mean, even Pete came back a couple times, and got everybody in trouble. But he came back and spent some time with us. When we went to Sarasota. For me, I think it was good because of all the those old Big Red Machine. Those guys were just starting to kind of come back and kind of give back.
Did you ever have like a particular moment where, like, whether it was an at bat or a single game or a season, where you felt like this is truly where I belong, I made the right choice kind of moment?
It's funny. I had a lot of moments where I would sit in those stair rails and go, is this really where I need to be? More of those moments, But baseball taught you, taught you so much about life. That's why I think baseball is such a great game, and I still have so much respect for the game today, because it taught me life lessons, and that you could take into the real world. You got to get up every day is a new day, and you got to get up and go perform today.
What did you find the most frustrating, particularly at any level, any age, across your time in the minors?
Back then, I didn't know a whole lot about baseball. I was getting paid to play baseball, and for me, and coming from where I came from, I enjoyed every minute. Obviously, frustration and things like that. I mean, I think as far as the most difficult part, when you go in that Pioneer League, when you got 12-hour road trips, especially when you start getting up and you leave at 12 o'clock and you show up at 12 o'clock, try to get a little nap, or sleep on the bus. And the toughest part, I remember one of the other times we were South Atlantic League, and we had left spring training, come up and played 4-game set in Savannah, and then I think it was Charleston. We went 8-0 on that trip, and we get to Charleston, West Virginia, and Charleston was rainy and wet, cold. We had 2 days in a hotel room to find out where we were going. I mean, we had to go find our own place. We had 2 days to do it, and we were trying to play games. We went 8-0. We had, like I said, just left spring training, had hotels. Kind of had some meal money coming up to when you're on the road, and then you get to Charleston, West Virginia, and you don't know where you're going to sleep. Like I said, the club played for two nights in a hotel, and we were all. But anyway, we finally, come across this old house, and we were living on, air mattresses, and we ended up we went 8-0 and then 0-8. People were more concerned with where they're going to sleep, and trying to get things moved in, trying to get situated, and trying to get comfortable. But a lot of that obviously has been improved today.
Obviously, nowadays minor league baseball is more of like an entertainment from the business side of it. Were you playing in front of bigger crowds or smaller crowds, or like on like the average Friday, Saturday night?
It was really according to where we at. Billings had a great following. I mean, they would be 3,500, there every night. Was Burlington, Iowa, and it was a little smaller crowds, 500 to 1,000 people. So we had 2 A-ball teams in the same league, which nobody does. I mean, but so it was kind of one of those deals where they had just kind of, okay, here's a place you can go, and we're gonna call this our better team. And I mean, we had 8 big leaguers on that club. We Corky Miller, Brandon Larson, Gookie Dawkins, Antonio Perez, Adam Dunn, Dwayne Wise, Austin Kearns, and Dunn didn't even play. He ended up he's almost a Hall of Famer, and he didn't even hardly step on the field.
What were you say you were probably most proud of in your career?
It's for me. I mean, again, for what I do now is just relationships that you make. The guys that we grew up with still keep in touch, and there's a great fraternity there of people who kind of all had the same goals in mind. That for me is what I take from it.
I saw you had you pitched an inning in Chattanooga with like a 27 ERA. Would you remember anything about that?
Funny story. Sean Kemp, who pitched in the big leagues, 3 years earlier, we were in Idaho Falls, and we had a big brawl. Somebody hit me and from the side. Well, everybody said it was Sean Kemp. Sure enough, I come in the 13th inning, and Donnie Scott was our manager that year. And this is 3 years later. Kemp comes up to, he's pitching, and so I hit him, and he's kind of looking at me, and I'm kind of looking at him. He goes to first base, and then after the inning, I walk in the dugout, and Donnie Scott goes, "You did that on purpose." I was like, "Yeah, you don't remember that brawl?" And so anyway, so 10 years later, we're down at Jupiter, the big amateur event, and somebody says, "Hey, do you know Sean Camp? He's coming over." I said, "Yeah." I said, "I do. I need to talk to him." You know? So sure enough, Campy comes in. We get to kind of joke and laugh about it. He goes, "Man," he goes, "I know you hit me on purpose." He said, "But I didn't know why." He goes, he said, "I wouldn't mean to hit you in Idaho Falls." So this whole 20 years, me thinking he hit me, kind of sucker punched me. It wasn't even him.
After your playing career, did you had an idea that you wanted to keep working in baseball even after you were done as a player, or what was your progression from post-playing career to where you are at now at 5-Star National?
The biggest thing, that somebody ever told me come out of baseball is, you have to replace that with something. And, some people replace it with drugs and alcohol, and some people replace it with spending money, and some people replace it with all kinds of different things. And so I had a fear of heights. I got into flying. I kind of started it a couple of days a week. That became my void from baseball. I will say this, and my mentors that be successful, he always said, stick to what you know. And I had Dairy Queens and I had all kinds of things, when I got out of baseball, still trying to kind of figure it out. And then it was when I went kind of back to baseball, trying to help other people who are in my situations coming out be more successful. And so, it's been a huge blessing for me. We've been able to impact a lot of lives, and I don't think anybody can ever really get it out. If you're a baseball guy, it's always there.
With how statistically inclined our modern day game is, this interview will always serve as a reminder to me of the human side of the game. Behind every stat sheet of a major or minor leaguer is anger, elation, frustration, and joy. Behind every strikeout and error is a guy who just misses his family. And as someone who's a sabermetric baseball fan myself, being able to understand the human element is just as important as the sabermetric element of the game. And while I'm kind of listing off names and shortening these 43 players to just a few sentences, understanding that every one of these guys has their own stories is important. My hope from this interview is that you're able to appreciate what these minor leaguers went through. Once again, I want to thank Andy Burress for his time in the interview. Andy Burress also has a son, Drew Burress, who is currently the number 2 overall prospect in Georgia and attends Georgia Tech University, playing outfield. Moving on to number 20 of the Brady 43, we have Josh Logan. Drafted by the Pittsburgh Pirates, he never really found his footing in minor league baseball. However, he was absolutely dominant in independent ball. If there's ever such a thing as a quad A player between independent ball and minor league baseball, Josh Logan would be that equivalent. He had a pretty impressive start in rookie ball, having an over 900 OPS, but after 130 games at the AA level, he ended with a 599 OPS. Once he transitioned to indie ball for 4 years, he had a 900 OPS and commonly had a 400 on-base percentage. Luis Cardona was drafted by the Red Sox and probably had the shortest career of anyone on this list. His slash line was a 184 batting average, 234 on base, and a 248 slugging. It was a shorter sample size of 73 games, but he only had a 3% walk rate compared to a 25% strikeout rate. Mike Martin Jr. was the son of famous Florida State manager Mike Martin. Martin Jr. himself had a relatively interesting but short career. He had more walks than strikeouts, which is impressive at any level, but ultimately just could not hit. He only had a 197 batting average and never passed A-ball. When you look at it in the grand scheme of things, these guys ultimately make other players look better. When using traditional baseball stats to evaluate players such as the 90s, I'm sure Mike Martin gave plenty of guys RBIs from home runs or doubles that brought him home. After his playing career, he went on to coach at Florida State University alongside his father and managed the team briefly before being let go. Juan Rivera was similar to Luis Cardona. He was drafted by the Rangers and had a 39% strikeout rate, paired with a lack of power. He never made it past A-ball. His slash line is a 216 batting average, 307 on base, and a 177 slugging. If it weren't for Mike Kincaid, we would have gone 26 catchers drafted without an MLB appearance. Kincaid himself was a pretty streaky hitter, having seasons and small sample sizes of 194 OPS plus in 37 games, and then follow that up with an 85 OPS plus in 88 games. Kingdale's most impressive year in the minor leagues was his time at AA in the Texas League. He had a 385 batting average, a 455 on-base percentage, and a 588 slugging in 125 games. You could classify him as a quad A player. In the minors, he had a 905 OPS, while in his major league career, he had a 749 OPS. Overall, for his MLB career that spanned 222 games, he had a perfectly average 100 OPS plus. The main reason Kinkdale didn't play more, to what I believe, is the result of him switching from catcher to outfield/first baseman. Because catcher is such a physically demanding position, they are expected more to carry their weight on the defensive side of the plate and working with pitchers rather than with their bat. The catcher at the end of the day is essentially the on-field coach, and in comparison to a bad defensive outfielder, 100 OPS just isn't as impressive. Just as a reminder, Kinkdale is still on the Brady 43 because he was drafted as an MLB catcher. Kinkdale also played 1 year in Japan before ultimately retiring and is currently a coach at California State University. At number 25, we have Kirk Pierce. Drafted by the Phillies, he never made it to the majors, hovering around a 700 OPS in the minor leagues. He stuck around the AA level for a while before being promoted to AAA. While his time was short there, he didn't excel at the AAA level and ultimately was sent back down to AA, where his career would shortly end after that before going to indie ball for 6 years, where he was a perfectly serviceable indie ball player. Next up, we have Kyle Wagner, and after skipping 2.5 rounds, this is the largest gap without a catcher being drafted. Coming out of Wake Forest as a 4-year senior, it's because of his age I would be led to assume he was given minimal chances. He entirely bypassed rookie ball, which is unusual, and went straight to the A level, where he had way below subpar numbers, but he only had 36 games before being released. The main issue was his ability to hit. He only had a 141 batting average. Despite lacking the ability to hit, he still got on base at a 340 rate due to a 1-to-1 walk to strikeout ratio. He would later go on to write a book called How the Rivercats Won, which details his events as a coach in high school baseball and Little League. Next up, we have probably my favorite name in the draft, Bobby O'Toole. With how ludicrous 1990s scouting was, try and tell me they didn't draft this guy because they thought he could develop an extra tool because of his name. Jokes aside, he never made it past A-ball with a strikeout rate at 30%. His best year was a second of 3 seasons, but was cut shortly after regressing, going from an 819 OPS to a 331 OPS before being let go. Brian Downs was drafted by the White Sox, once again never made it past A-ball, had a really bad walk rate of only 5% and a career on-base percentage of only .293. Even after being cut by the White Sox and transferring to indie ball, he still struggled with similar numbers, having an only 5% walk rate and only an on-base of .304. At 29, we have Josh Holliday, who's maybe the biggest sabermetric darling of the list so far. While never making it past A-ball, in 2 seasons he had over 400 at-bats with a 26% walk rate and a 27% strikeout rate. This accumulated to him having a .410 on-base percentage with an 828 OPS. You have to take this, of course, all with a grain of salt because it was very low levels of the minors, but I'm still somewhat surprised that the Oakland A's didn't try to sign him after he was cut. And yes, Josh Holliday is related to Matt Holliday, the famous Cardinals outfielder, and currently coaches at Oklahoma State University. Eric McQueen never made it past A-ball. He had a 36% strikeout rate with a career .279 on-base percentage across 3 seasons. Post-baseball, however, he would go on to be the director of baseball operations at the University of Tennessee and become a scout for the Toronto Blue Jays. And of course, his son is Lightning McQueen, who would go on to win multiple Piston Cups. The first catcher drafted in the 15th round was Lance Severance. There is a lot of mystery surrounding Lance's career because he actually by far had the shortest career of anyone on this list. He only played 9 games with 4 singles and 4 walks and 23 at-bats. He also had one of the most dramatic draft slot drops ever. Coming out of high school, he was drafted by the Mariners in the 15th round, but decided to go to college instead. However, in the 96 draft, he was drafted in the 41st round by the Tampa Bay Devil Rays before signing. Because of this drop-off, I'm kind of led to assume that something happened either injury-wise or character-wise. Next up is Nate Forbush. He only played 2 seasons at the single A level, with an OPS of 739 and no major strikeout or walk issues. What's even stranger is that he got better in his second year, so I'm not entirely sure why his career ended so abruptly. Tony Johnson amazingly spent 3 seasons at the rookie ball level before being sent to A-ball. By OPS, Johnson just regressed every year in that category, along with a 33% strikeout rate in his final year. Overall, he just kind of failed to hit, only ever posting a .202 batting average. Fast forward 2 rounds later and we have Brian Libra. He spent 3 years in rookie ball as well, but was never promoted to above A-ball. And at the lowest level of baseball, he only had a 4% walk rate, and just in general had career numbers that were worse than Tony Johnson already. Alex Andreopoulos was another Canadian-born player who had a bit more of a minor league career than the last few catchers we mentioned. His best seasons were at the AA level, but didn't quite make it to the AAA level. What strikes me most about his career is his walk to strikeout ratio. I mean, not to bother, but do you know how much I like walk to strikeout ratios yet? Prove me wrong, strikeouts are boring. I don't know where that came from. Anyways, in 8 years of minor league play, he had more walks and strikeouts by a pretty decent margin. He had over 2 seasons with an over 400 on-base percentage and 4 seasons of an on-base of 350. He accumulated 184 walks for a 14% walk rate compared to 134 strikeouts for a 10% strikeout rate. In total, he had 2 seasons with an over 400 on-base percentage and 4 seasons with an over 350 on-base percentage. His primary flaw as a player was on the slugging side of it. In 8 years, he only had 27 home runs, and as well, he wasn't a big doubles or triples threat either. After retiring as a player, he ultimately never made the major leagues, but shortly after retiring, went on to go back to his home country of Canada and receive a position as a bullpen catcher for the Toronto Blue Jays. Recently, he was interviewed about his role as a bullpen catcher for the Blue Jays, and personally, I love his response. He says, "I love what I do," with a smile. "I tell people I'm lucky, I'm living the dream. I'm in the big leagues." Nothing beats that. Craig Caballero only played 1 season in the minor league system for the Detroit Tigers. His lone season at the single-A level, he had a 29% strikeout rate and a 690 OPS. He would go on to play 1 more season at the independent ball level with around a 700 OPS. After his stint in indie ball, he would go on to retire from the game of baseball and currently works on his family's dairy farm in Arizona. Todd Fehrenbaugh spent 2 seasons at the rookie ball level for the Cincinnati Reds and simply could not hit. Probably the worst hitter on the list so far. He had an absurd 51% strikeout rate across 2 seasons. His career slash line was a 132 batting average, 216 on base, and a 198 slugging. This is probably by far the lowest OPS I've ever seen in a player ever, which is an incredibly low 392 OPS. Now, this is obviously a very small sample size. It was only 36 games, but the closest comparison I could think is Luis Cardonia. While he had 73 games, his numbers are only slightly better than Todd's. So in a worst case scenario, you have to draft one of these guys. Theoretically, Todd is better simply because his value was drafted all the way in the 17th round compared to the 8th round. Defensively, it doesn't get much better for Todd either. Of the 40 base runners who attempted to steal on him, 38 were successful and only 2 were caught stealing. Jason Shai was the last catcher taken in the 17th round. Never stood out offensively with his career OPS in 2 seasons being 624, and then defensively as well in 2 seasons, he caught 1 base runner on 20 attempts. With the first pick in the 18th round, the Angels would take Greg Jones off the board. Greg Jones was drafted as a catcher in the 95 draft, but ultimately did not choose to sign. He would go on to be drafted next year by the Angels again, this time in the 42nd round. But as a pitcher, maybe we were all just blind in the 90s, but maybe this was foreshadowing to Shohei Ohtani, just, 2 decades earlier. He ultimately did manage to get 3 at-bats in the minor leagues with 0 hits and 1 strikeout. Aside from his interesting transition from a catcher to a pitcher in 1 year, I also find it interesting because he's relatively close to my hometown and I've never heard of him before. He did end up making it to the major league level for the Angels as a relief pitcher. And at number 40, we have Brian Fuller. Drafted by the Tigers, he spent 3 seasons at the single-A level, serving in a backup catching role with moderate numbers, but in his final year, he had a drastic drop-off in every category, going from 2 years of 800 OPS ball down to 560 OPS, and ultimately never played again. Lou Demen played 2 seasons at the single-A level for the Cardinals, was ultimately cut midway through his 2nd season, just could not hit, and struck out at a 32% clip with a 567 OPS. Matt Buckles was drafted from the Phillies out of high school, spent 2 years in rookie ball before being cut after failing to produce offensively and defensively. Can I get a drum roll for the final member of the Brady 43? Pat Hallmark was drafted in the 18th round, 498th overall by the Kansas City Royals. The last catcher taken before Tom Brady made it all the way up to the AAA level before faltering. In his final year at AA in 2000 before being called up to AAA, he had his career highs in on-base, slugging, OPS, home runs, doubles, walks, and batting average at a full season's workload. After failing to transition to the AAA level, he was cut shortly after. Nowadays, you can catch Paul Hallmark coaching University of Texas San Antonio's baseball team. And with that, we conclude the Brady 43. If you're interested, I do have a couple of notes and general topics I want to touch up on. A couple of ironic things I want to conclude with during my research was, in the opening clip, you see Tom Brady with the Kansas City Royals hat, which I found interesting because Pat Hallmark was the last guy drafted and he was drafted by the Royals. And Tom Brady grew up in San Francisco, so it doesn't really make sense as to why he's wearing a Royals hat. For me, it's just one of those ironic things that perfectly lined up with each other. One note from my research was that I found that Tom Brady was projected to be a 2nd to 3rd round talent, but obviously was passed up due to his interest in going to Michigan University to be their starting quarterback. I kind of believe the whole second to third round thing to be a tad bit exaggerated. I'm not denying that he was talented, but Tom Brady's ultimately what we know as one of the greatest athletes of all time, period. At the end of the day, it's just easier to say that someone who ended up becoming one of the greatest athletes of all time would have also casually been great at baseball. And while our information is a bit limited regarding his senior high school baseball numbers, we know that he had a 200 batting average for the majority of his senior season and ended the season with a 311 batting average, which is impressive, but at the same time, most top prospects generally never struggle at the high school level because they're generally ahead of every one of their peers. The reality is, even as a senior, he still struggled partially for long lengths of time. Overall, I'm not denying that he was definitely baseball top talent worthy, just maybe top 10 rounds as a general safe estimate rather than saying he easily could have gone second or third. Looking at the draft class in general for the catchers, the Astros and Dodgers both drafted a whopping 13 catchers each, and I want to take that with a grain of salt because the majority of them for the Astros were taken in the later rounds of the drafts, and the Dodgers didn't even show up on this list at all, meaning that they were all drafted past the 18th round. Regardless, it's still kind of bizarre, and the fact that out of the 13 catchers each team drafted, each team only produced one MLB player. In terms of the overall catching draft class, this was relatively disappointing. Of the 180 catchers drafted, only 19 of such ever ended up playing a single MLB game, which equates to roughly 10% of the draft class making it to the MLB. And in terms of WAR, the best player in this draft was David Ross, drafted in the 19th round, a little bit ahead of Tom Brady. Overall, a lot of these later round guys ended up making this draft class better. One of the more controversial topics of the 90s and early 2000s was, should you draft high school guys or college guys? High school guys were generally seen with more upside, while college guys were seen as more pro-ready but lower ceilings. 11 catchers ended up being drafted from high school in this draft class, adding up to 22.6 WAR combined. But that's largely carried by one man, David Ross, who ended up with 10 WAR himself. Meanwhile, 8 college players ended up making it to the major league level and had a 23.9 WAR, and it's not really carried by one singular individual. So like I said, David Ross was a WAR leader of the catching draft class here with 10 WAR. Definitely had the most memorable and storybook career. He's obviously most famous for his time with the 2016 Cubs World Series run. What's even crazier for me for David Ross's career, which I don't think we'll personally ever see again, was regarding his immediate transition from retired player to the Cubs manager. Obviously this didn't end up working out for the Cubs, but it was interesting to see. Personally, it felt like a bit of a nepotism hire because there are guys in AAA, AA, and High A that had been managing for decades and decades, and ultimately they just didn't get their shot because David Ross came out of baseball retirement. Overall, I'm not denying that he was a smart baseball guy, but it's still a weird progression from player to manager. Overall, though, in terms of the general 90s era, this is actually one of the better catching draft class. Let's just say the next couple of draft classes won't be nice to catchers either, but if there's one thing the 95 draft class can say is that they are definitively better than the 96 catching draft class. And as any Herb Jones salesman would say, you can put that on a trophy or a class ring. One last point I want to make is about baseball in general during the 90s era. Recently, it's kind of gotten the attention as the best era of baseball. And while the 90s definitely can stake its claim in that, I also kind of believe it's part of nostalgia. The people who grew up watching that 90s era style of baseball are ultimately now adults making careers out of themselves. And when those adults think about their childhood innocence, they are naturally drawn to the 90s era of baseball. And there's nothing wrong with that. Someone who's born in the 70s could easily say, hey, the 70s era was the best era of baseball in my opinion. I personally was born in 2000, and I still have a ton of respect for everything that happened in the sports world in general during the 90s. In particular, I think the 90s are great because of their willingness to try new things unlike today's game. Whether that's in the form of new uniforms and logos that break from the team's traditional look, all the way up to new kinds of promotions such as the Back to the Future games. The biggest issue I have is more in regards to the ultimate prize, the World Series. In this dynasty, you had the Yankees and Braves basically winning everything. And for me, that's a big issue because as a fan of a small market team myself, there was basically no hope for you to win the World Series. And as a fan of baseball, you have to believe that your team has a shot to win it all rather than just the same 2 or 3 teams that spend the most money. If you take away the Reds and Twins early 90s World Series, which were fluke in of themselves, you kind of have to understand that you had to be top 3 in payroll in order to win a World Series. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for owners spending in order to win a championship, but when it comes down to only the top 3 teams having a shot, that's when it becomes an issue. If you fast forward to 2010 to 2020, you can see the average World Series winner has a top 10 payroll. And just the idea of having a top 10 payroll team in the World Series was basically foreign in the 90s. So overall, even though it's still the higher avalanche of teams winning the World Series with payrolls, having even 7 more teams compared to the top 3 creates more parity and variety in the league, rather than just the same old dynasties winning it. I understand that not everyone will agree with my point here, but you have to understand it from all sides of the game, not just from a New Yorker's perspective or an Atlanta perspective. I will add, however, the expansion boom of the 90s was amazing for baseball, and I'd say it worked out perfect for every side. One thing I'm glad as well that occurred was the Blue Jays' run in the 90s, where they won back-to-back World Series. Ultimately, more baseball in more countries is a good thing for the sport of baseball in general, and I believe these 2 World Series runs for the Blue Jays cemented Canada as a baseball country as well. The other major issue I had with the 90s was regarding stadium situations. While I'm not going to act like today's any better, in that 90s era, cities were basically expected to pay nearly the full amount for the stadium rather than splitting it 50-50, which is more common today. So that's my general thoughts on the 90s decade of baseball. I'm pretty passionate about it, and I recognize as great as it was, it had a lot of flaws in of itself. Overall, leave a comment, let me know what you think of the 90s era. And with that, I would like to conclude the Brady 43.